My name is James Dixon and welcome to the Ground Jewels. This week we've got a fantastic guest. We've got David Walker from the Football Clichés podcast, formerly of TalkSport and The Athletic. And he's going to be talking about Watford's Vicarage Road Stadium, and that's a really fun chat coming up soon. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone who listened last week and for all the really positive feedback about us being back, and particularly around Charles Dagnall and the episode that we did on the Tampa Stadium. Really well received. Very pleased that you enjoyed it, because we were going across the pond for the first time. Charles seemed to enjoy it too, so that's great. And if you haven't heard that one, please go back into our archive. There's that one with Charles. There's other ones with great people like Ruth Madeley and Ailey Doyle and Mike Bubbins and Dotun Adebayo. All of these episodes look at that person's favourite sports ground. And that's what we try and do on the Ground Jewels. We look at a ground that means something to somebody and we explore that. And that's what we do with Dave in a bit. But first, we've got news from around the grounds this week, and we have to start with the fact that the World Cup final for 2026 has been awarded to Dallas, to Jerry World, to AT&T Stadium in Dallas. One of the best stadiums in the bid, one of the best stadiums in the world at the moment. Not really a surprise. New York was considered to be another contender, and going to be honest, I'm kind of glad it didn't go to New York. MetLife, not a patch on Dallas's stadium. I thought it also, Los Angeles and SoFi Stadium could have been in there, and the sentimentalist in me would have loved to have seen it gone to the Azteca again after 70 and 86, but we all knew that this final was going to go to an American city, and I think Dallas is probably the right choice there. So that to look forward to in 2.5 years' time. More news from snooker. We talked about the Ali Pali last week. Ali Carter, the runner-up in the Masters last week, not happy with the Alexandra Palace crowd, and I think he's got every right to be. He called them morons. They were calling out during his shot. So a little bit of crowd behaviour issues at the snooker, which we don't normally get. And from the world of football, we've got positive news in Northampton. A construction firm has said it started work to finish the long-awaited fourth stand at Sixfields, the East Stand, which was first announced in 2013, first started work on 2014 and has laid largely dormant for the remaining of that time after some contractual issues. So that's good news for the Cobblers, and some potentially bad news for Halifax Town. Calderdale Council is looking at selling the Shea. Great historic venue. There's been rugby league there, football there since the 1920s, Speedway there at one time as well. A really old school venue, very close to Halifax town centre, and you can see why the council in times like these is looking at assets like that and thinking, can that generate some money? But what that means for the future of Halifax town, we don't know. There's a consultation period happening now for the next 6 weeks, so we'll keep you up to date with that as that happens. But fingers crossed for the Shea and for the future of Halifax Town Football Club. Back to David. I've known David, it feels weird calling him David, I've known DCW since, when did I know him? It's almost 15 years. Yes, 2009 was the first time I met DCW. A young, fresh-faced David Cameron Walker at Nottingham Trent University. He's gone on to do some great things with the Student Radio Association and then with TalkSport, more lately The Athletic. But he's probably best known to you for the smash hit Football Clichés podcast that he does with Adam Hurrey and Charlie Eccleshare. They're on tour soon. I'm going to the Leeds gig. I think it's going to be it's one of the best podcasts out there now in the Goalhanger podcast network, making the transfer over from The Athletic recently. And they're just going from strength to strength. Great lads. And Dave is an incredibly passionate Watford fan. He talks eloquently about Vicarage Road, his Watford origin story, which is linked very closely to his dad. It's a very personal story, and I'm incredibly pleased that he was willing to share it with us. So, David Walker. So this week on the Ground Jewels podcast, we are joined by David Walker of the Football Clichés podcast. David, lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me, James. Great to be here.
Delighted that you've joined us this week to talk about Vicarage Road. So in Football Clichés style, I want to... Is it a cauldron? Is it a fortress? Describe Vicarage Road to people who've never had the privilege.
It's none of the above, I'm afraid. I can't credibly claim that that it's ever been a cauldron. Or, I mean, technically, there might have been the odd season where you could describe it as a fortress. The season that we last got promoted to the Premier League, so that was like the second COVID season. We had a really, really good home record that season. Hardly conceded any goals, won loads of games, but there was no fans. Can a fortress be a fortress without anyone in it? I'm not sure.
So tell us about your first visit to Vicarage Road, 1995. I was going to say I'm led to believe, but you've led me to believe that.
Well, it is true. I went to Vicarage Road for the first time not as a Watford supporter. In 1995, October 1995, Watford drew the defending Premier League champions at that point, Blackburn Rovers, in the third round of the Coca-Cola Cup. And at that point in my burgeoning football fandom, I identified as a Blackburn Rovers fan because I was a little bit of a late developer when it came to football. I didn't really get into it until I was about 10. And that was right at the point where Blackburn were winning the league. They'd nearly won the league the year before. I think the first time I saw them play actually was in a UEFA Cup match against Trelleborgs, I think. And I remember seeing them on the TV. I think BBC had those games back then. And I remember watching them on TV. And I think somebody had bought me Alan Shearer's Diary of a Season or something as well. And I just attached myself to Blackburn. I liked Alan Shearer. I liked the idea of supporting a good team, but one that no one else supported, because there were Liverpool fans and Arsenal fans and Man United fans in my school. Weren't really many Watford fans that I could sort of ascertain at that time. But so I sort of went for the kind of, I suppose I was trying to be in my own way. I was trying to be a little bit hipster, even though they were the sort of one of the best teams in the country at the time. And then when I saw that they'd drawn Watford in the cup, and it was also 3 days before my birthday, I was like nagging my dad, can we go? Can we get tickets? Because he was a Watford fan, but he didn't go to the games. He didn't have a season ticket. So it wasn't usual for him to sort of go, and he wouldn't have taken me unless I'd really wanted to go. So we got tickets. We went to that match. We sat in the East stand, which was the family stand at the time. It's now the Elton John stand. It's since been redeveloped. But back then it was wooden seats. It was wooden stands. It was sort of in two different parts. There was kind of two parts of it that had been shunted together. I think it got built in the 1920s originally. And I just remember walking up like a fire escape kind of thing to get into the back of the stand when you went through the turnstile. I just remember it all being wood. And I remember that cliched image of the green pitch under the lights when you come out into the stand from the concourse. And Watford went ahead 1-0 in that game. They went 1-0 up. Kevin Phillips scored. Blackburn played a little bit of a weaker team, I think, but Shearer was playing. And he and Mike Newell scored to turn the game around, and Blackburn went through. But I enjoyed the experience so much that I wanted to go back. And at that time, Watford were in the first division still. They went down that season, but it was it was like £1 for kids with adults. So it was like cheap and easy for my dad to take me. We went back to a few more games that season, and gradually I transitioned into being a Watford fan.
You had quite a similar experience to me there, and I think we've talked about, because I had a dalliance with Blackburn Rovers when I was younger. I think my nan bought me a football shirt. She was like, "You're into football," and I was like, "I'm from Birmingham, man. Why have you bought me a Blackburn shirt?" This must have been like one of those that were in the sports shops because they were doing well. So I was a 10, 11-year-old advertising McEwen's lager in my PE lessons at school, and it was 2 days before my 11th birthday, because I went to see them this exact same season about 6 weeks after you did, because they were in my neck of the woods. They were playing Coventry away, and my dad took me to Highfield Road, which is a gloriously sad, now obviously sadly departed stadium. But he got us tickets in with the Coventry fans. So he was just very much like, do not say anything, do not cheer for Blackburn. And it was advice that I didn't need, as Coventry ran out 5-0 winners in a in a game featuring a lot of snow and an orange ball.
Brilliant.
So yeah, it's weird. Oh, it's one of those where you just got like, Coventry, they're rubbish, perennially useless in the Premier League, era, and then they beat the defending champions 5-0. And I remember getting the bus back into Birmingham, like, I was like, this is rubbish. I'm going to support Birmingham City instead, which is, I mean, another terrible life decision, really. But yeah, so it's weird that you had that we both had that same dalliance. But I love that gave you a little bit of a window there. And maybe I should have become a Coventry fan. Who knows? I'm not sure it would have been any better than being a Birmingham fan, to be honest.
We've shared the same stadium.
We have shared the same stadium, the same three-sided stadium. Oh God, we'll have to do St Andrews one day. But the saga about St Andrews in the last few years is very, very sad. And did your fandom for Watford mean that your dad started going more? And what did that mean for yours relationship?
It did, and really, my relationship with Watford did run in parallel to the relationship I had with my dad, who sadly passed away in 2017. But he was a lover of all sports. He would always watch sport if it was on the telly. He, rugby, cricket, loved his F1, loved football, But as I said, it's probably because I didn't take to football initially when I was sort of 6 or 7, or younger when you start getting into it. He kind of left me to my own devices. And because he wasn't a match-going fan, it just wasn't something that we kind of started naturally until I, as I said, made him take me to this game. And then from then on, it sort of gradually became this sort of semi-regular thing that we would do. Initially, he would take me to the games, as I said, because it was £1 for kids if they came with an adult. But then when I got a little bit older, I started going on my own. And I had a period where I'd go with some friends and I got a season ticket on my own, and occasionally I'd go to a cup match with him or something. But then it kind of came full circle in a way towards what went on to be sort of the latter years of his life. I sort of took him in a way when he started taking me, and it was me that I would always message him and say, Dad, shall we go to the football? Do you want to come to the football? I'll sort the tickets out. Boxing Day, around Christmas time, or if there was a big cup match, or when I'll be back, just when I'd have some time on my hands or whatever. So it became something that we did relatively regularly, but the relationship started out him taking me, and by the end I very much felt that I was taking him, but that time together was cherished memories, really.
Yeah, there is that natural cycle of thing. I'm the one saying, should we go to something? I tried to take him to the Open last year when it was up at St Andrews, and he accepted the tickets gladly, and then he booked a cruise for the same week. And he was just like, oh, I forgot, son. I was like, all right, well, never mind. But you're getting into Watford at a really sort of interesting time. Obviously, it's the sort of peak age for football fandom. Sort of when you're sort of that 9, 10, 11, and you're devouring everything because you can get. But you get the second coming of Elton John at Watford at that time, and he bought the club for the second time, as I understand, in sort of early '96. He'd bought it previously in the mid '70s, and you'd gone on that run from the 4th division to the FA Cup final and finishing second in the league behind Liverpool. Just heady days, really. And then you get him coming back in. It must have been super exciting. I'm thinking, we're going to do it again. You've just seen Blackburn win the league, so a small team can win the league, and then you've got this sort of superstar chairman buying back into the club.
Well, yeah, it was exciting, but I don't think I quite understood it in terms of the historical context at the time, because I was born in 1985, so that's right in the middle, even sort of moving on towards the end of the kind of amazing Graham Taylor heyday of the 70s and 80s. I can remember there being excitement about it. I can remember like seeing on the programme, references to, as you say, like they're back. Elton John was back, Graham Taylor was back, Luther Blissett and Kenny Jackett were his assistants on the coaching staff. And my primary school was literally on Vicarage Road, just down the road from the stadium. So we would often get cheap tickets as well. And I remember getting tickets to one of his first games, not his first game back, which was against Ipswich, which I think we actually lost. We played Oldham a few weeks later and we beat them 2-1. And I remember getting tickets to that, and the Graham Taylor buzz was still there. And I kind of, I was aware that there was something in the air, but I obviously didn't really know the details or anything. And then that season, so he comes back, I think, in February, March time of that season. And we were adrift at that point. Glenn Roeder had managed the team that season. It had been a bad few years, been a bad decade for Watford in the 90s at that point. And we were heading out of the first division, unless less drastic measures were taken. And Taylor comes back in, brings some feel-good factor back to the place, signed a couple of loan players, signed Devon White on loan. David Connolly, young striker, comes into the team from the youth system. And we started winning games. And we went on it was like proper old school Taylor, like just up and at him and scoring loads, but conceding quite a lot as well. We beat Reading 4-2, I think, towards the end of the season. There was a game that I went to where they did a thing where it was the same price all over the ground. So we sat in like the expensive seats in like the top tier of the, what was then the Stanley Rouse stand. And we beat Grimsby 6-3 with 2 hat-tricks from Tommy Mooney and Craig Ramage, I think. And it was all leading to this crescendo of like, we're going to do it. And we had a game, the last game of the season was on TV. It was on ITV, the big match. And it was at home to Leicester, who needed to win to go up or maybe make the playoffs. And we needed a result. We needed to win and hope results went our way to stay up. We lost 1-0. Emil Heskey scored, and it kind of was an anticlimax, and we went down. But that period was another step forward in me getting invested in it, because I can remember people talking about it at school. Because Watford were interesting and something was happening again. There was a little bit of a buzz in the town, and people were talking about it. Kids that didn't support Watford previously had been probably going with their dads or hearing from their dads about what was going on. I remember kind of getting swept away with it a little bit, and that was a little bit. And Blackburn, by contrast, had a bad season. They didn't do well. Ray Harford had taken over from Kenny Jackett after they won the league. So I had this natural path to kind of go off and support Watford.
And then you get invested and you get back-to-back promotions. One of the greatest feelings that you can get as a fan, I think, anyway.
Well, again, but it all comes just slightly too early for me to be really in the thick of it all, because I'm aware of it. We actually have a season when we go down, Kenny Jackett becomes the manager and Graham Taylor gets this sort of, he's called like general manager, which is like director of football type sort of thing. So Jackett takes the team for that season. We have an awful lot of draws and we end up finishing mid-table. It doesn't really work. And so then Taylor comes back in after that season as proper, like, right, okay, I'm the manager. Let's do this properly. That's when we win what was the second division then. We had Jason Lee playing for us in that season, Ronnie Rosenthal, and we went up in style, went up at Fulham in a great sunny day at Fulham on the last day of the season, actually winning the league. But I, because of that Jackett season, I'd gone to a few matches. That's when I bought my first shirt that season, red and black stripe away kit. So I was sort of there, but I still wasn't going to many matches. I think maybe twinned with like my dad wasn't around much at that time. So again, there wasn't that sort of natural in for me to go to matches. And then that season where we got promoted the second time, the second of the back-to-back promotions, going up to the Premier League, that is when, bang, I'm in. It fully takes hold because it becomes a national story that I'm so aware of. I remember going to the playoff first leg against Birmingham, which was at Vicarage Road. We were at home in that first leg. We win 1-0. And I remember that was the first game where I was I wasn't in like the family section, wasn't with my dad, wasn't with cheap ticket. It was like my mate from school who was like had a season ticket since he was 6 and goes with his brother and his sister and his mum who are proper hardcore fans. I went with them in the middle of the Vicarage Road end, which was the homestand at the time. And it was a big game, absolutely packed, sunny day. That's when I first understood, okay, this is a proper game. This really means something. And that again was another step forward in my relationship with the club and my journey as a supporter. And we had that amazing second leg at St Andrews where Birmingham score early, it goes to penalties, and we go to Wembley after that, beat Bolton. But that game against Bolton at Wembley, I listened to your episode you did with Nige Chassel about the old Wembley Stadium. That would have been my one chance really to go to the old Wembley, but my mum had booked a holiday for us. So I was in Menorca watching it in a hotel bar in Menorca with my red and black Watford away shirt on. And I remember jumping in the pool fully clothed after he won.
That's nice. I find Taylor really interesting because I guess this moment when this is part of his redemption arc, isn't it? And because he's a national figure of hate at some point, during his England time, completely, as we now all sort of realise, unjustifiably so. Sort of the bullying that essentially that a lot of the media directed at him. He then becomes a little, with the San Marino and the documentary, he becomes a little bit of a figure of fun. It doesn't work with him for Wolves, but then he's back at Watford and it's feel good again. And I saw it a little bit up close when he went back to Villa after for a second time. I think fans of clubs where he's been have an amazing affinity for Graham Taylor, the man, as well as Graham Taylor, the coach.
Certainly, and nowhere more so than Watford. And it was very heartening to hear that was the people at Aston Villa and at Wolves thought the same of him when he passed away in 2017, and it wasn't just Watford that held him in such high esteem, but there's a statue outside Vicarage Road of Graham Taylor now, and the pose is him sitting on the bench in the way that he used to do when there was no dugout of Vicarage Road in the 70s and 80s. He would sit on the bench uncovered because some of the sections of this, the terraces back then were uncovered. So he said, if the fans are going to get rained on, so are we. So he said that there should be no dugouts. We should sit in the elements as well, like the supporters. And that's the pose that he sits on with the statue outside the ground. But Taylor, he's got a stand named after him. He is, frequently referred to in all the sort of materials from the club as like Watford's greatest ever manager. We have a Graham Taylor match day before the start of the season in his honour. He is Watford, really. Without Watford and without Graham Taylor and obviously Elton John, who financed it all, but without those two, Watford are probably just bumbling around in what is League One now. That was kind of our level before those two came along in the late 70s. We were a sort of third or fourth division club perennially who might have the occasional cup run, but we certainly weren't a top 30 team, which is basically what we've been pretty much ever since. But I do remember, again, it was another sort of way for me to realise what was going on with Taylor, because I remember when we got promoted, my dad would always get like the papers, you just get the Sun, and I think it was on the front page. I think Graham Taylor, like GT is back, was on the front page of the Sun because he was such a national figure. And 99, not that long after his time at England, and it was a big thing. And it was nice to know that he had that redemption arc, because if you watched him speak about his England time, or you watch the documentary, you know how hard that hit him. He did carry that with him for the rest of his days, I think. And for him to have that success at Watford, and the day, especially at Wembley, where we beat Bolton, you could see the emotion, the sort of quiet satisfaction, but the emotion on his face when we went up, thinking, at a stadium where he would have had some of his lowest moments, to think, I'm back, I've done it, and this is an amazing thing.
I hadn't even made that Wembley connection. I love that you've got a statue. I think the there's some fantastic statues at football grounds that have been recently commissioned. I think there's been some ropey ones as well. Everyone can make fun of the Ronaldo, and I love that how clubs are sort of paying homage to some of their heritage. It's off on a tangent. When you were talking about almost the humbleness of Graham Taylor and how that's reflected in the statue, it made me think of the Cloughy statue, and not the Clough in Nottingham statue, but do you know about the Rochdale statue?
Oh, no.
There's a guy called Cloughy, I think. Maybe it's David Clough, or I'm sure he's definitely. It's David Clough from Rochdale. He was sort of like the guy who would always be doing the 50-50 draw. When they were in trouble, he'd be like knocking up on people's houses, raising money for their club, selling raffle tickets and all that. And I think he passed away. So in Scotland, in Rochdale, they've put a statue of this fan, the super fan, sort of David Clough, in his normal seat, so he can always watch the games. And I think that's just a lovely touch.
Nice.
Obviously now he's going to be watching National League football, but that's different. But it's just, I feel like over the last few years, clubs are getting more attuned to sort of the heritage aspect, the heritage role that they play, and how fans want to see that. And am I right? Do you have a mural at Vicarage Road as well? Or have I completely imagined that?
No, that's correct. And I think you are seeing more and more murals at the moment. It seems to be a trend. Obviously, they're easier to put up than statues. You can put them up in different places. They look better than a statue, really, don't they? And I think a lot of the recent murals that you've seen in like Crystal Palace have had one for Zaha recently. They've done some up in Liverpool recently. I think there's one for some around Arsenal. Most of the ones I've seen have been done by the same company called Muir Walls, and they did one of Graham Taylor ahead of the FA Cup final in 2019 when we got there. And they've around the town, there's like an underpass on the way to Vicarage Road where they've decorated the whole thing. They've done like a mural of depicting the famous Troy Deeney goal against Leicester, like all the way along the walls of the underpass. And they've got Luther Blissett and some other club legends, Tony Coton, another Birmingham connection, all the way across this underpass. So and also at the start of last season, they did one of Elton, because he came back to do a concert in the summer, and they did a big mural of him on his stand at the sort of one end. Did one of Luther Blissett as well, which they had to actually paint over because they preempted. He was offered the position of honorary club president, which he turned down. So they had to paint over that little bit at the end, but it looks nice all the same.
Oh, that's amazing. I love those. Like, I can just imagine getting that rejection email. It's just like, we've painted the mural. The Lou. I mean, this is the thing as well. I mean, I can't think of Luther Blissett without going. He went from Watford to AC Milan. But you touched on a couple of things there, which is, and I could go in any direction here, but let's talk about Troy Deeney. And I know you weren't there, but for me, that goal, the playoff, that moment with the penalty, the miss, and the Troy Deeney goal, is like almost like the purest expression of football and fandom of highs to lows. I don't know how, you probably know how many seconds it is from the penalty being missed to you guys scoring, but I can't imagine it's more than 15 or 20 seconds. What was that like?
Well, I know we haven't actually really talked much about Vicarage Road yet, but undoubtedly it is the most iconic moment in that stadium's history, and there have been a few, but it not only is it that, it's undoubtedly one of the most iconic moments in sort of the modern era of British football. Really, it transcends the moment and the context of the match. It's that Deeney goal. People will know what you're talking about, to the point where I was recently in Munich, in Germany, on a stag do. We went to an 1860 Munich game, and you should get someone to do their stadium, because they're back at their old stadium, which is where Bayern used to play in like the 60s. That's a great stadium. But we were chatting to someone after the game, one of the locals, and he was sort of asking all of us, who do you support? And all the lads were going, oh, Arsenal, Tottenham, United, whatever. Somebody pointed at me and said, oh, and he's Watford. And the guy paused and stopped and went, Watford? Right foot, yeah? And he sort of mimes thrashing through the ball with his right foot. He went, the most amazing goal of all time. And like, he knew that he knew about that goal and linked it to Watford. And it was an incredible thing. One of my eternal regrets in life that I wasn't there. And the reason I wasn't there was because I thought, I was living in London at the time, didn't have a season ticket or anything. I thought we'd lost the first leg. I thought, look, I'll watch this at home. If we win this game, I'll go to Wembley in the playoff final. Don't worry, it'd be great. How was I to know that I'd miss out on one of the most amazing things you'll ever see? So let that be a lesson to anyone. If you can go and you're on the fence, just go, make the effort, because you never know what's going to happen. But it was incredible to see. And even in a weird way, I think it had a sort of weird legacy that sort of still extends to this day, in that it's kind of brought about the resurgence of the pitch invasion. People saw that spontaneous pitch invasion. Everyone was on the pitch. I mean, they actually started playing the game again after that. There was about a minute's worth of play after they cleared the pitch. But everyone was on the pitch. Zola was falling over. Deeney was in the stands with his shirt off. The Leicester players' bodies were strewn all over the pitch, and there was just people running everywhere. Kasper Schmeichel looked like he was trying to fight people. And you saw a lot of copycat incidents after that, even to the point where Watford fans, two seasons later, when we got promoted eventually to the Premier League, our last game of the season was home to Sheffield Wednesday. If we'd won that, we would have won the league and gone up. We'd already been promoted by this point. We conceded a late goal, actually, to draw 1-1, which meant Bournemouth won the title. But people, that memory was so fresh in their minds. They wanted to do the pitch invasion. They wanted that moment, and you can't force it. And I remember one of our players, Daniel Tozer, was trying to take a corner in the last minute when we could still score a goal, and they had to push fans out the way to take the corner because they were sort of on the edge of the pitch. And I do feel that it kind of spurred a lot of people to just kind of get on the pitch. Now it's sort of par for the course, right? Like, maybe it was ever thus, but it feels to me like that moment had a bit of an impact in that everyone saw how amazing it was and wanted a little slice of that themselves, but you can't replicate it. That was an incredible one-off situation with so many points in the move where it could have broke down. Almunia's injured his hamstring in that game, and that means he gets up really slowly to save the penalty rebound. It looks like he's never going to make it, and he saves it. Cassetti boots it up in the air, just not looking where he kicks it, just goes up in the air, stays on the pitch, and Kichianya just kills it stone dead with his first touch. Runs it down the wing to Forestieri. Forestieri, who was an erratic player at the best of times, takes someone on, dinks it to the back post. Jonathan Hogg, who's a defensive midfielder, hadn't scored a goal for us, had run 70 yards. He's got a free header at the back post, and you're thinking he's not the man you want the ball to fall to, but he has the presence of mind to head it back into the 6-yard box. And who's there but Deeney? Shouts, gets Matej Vidra out the way, puts his foot through it. The place goes absolutely wild. But it's all of it was so close to not happening, but it was perfect. And there is no better example of how amazing football can be when the stars align and that sort of thing happens.
You get it a lot in, and this might be a weird transition, but in college basketball, you get court storming. And when court storming, and people throw their hands up and go, oh, someone's going to get injured. Naff off. Barely anyone ever get it. It's got to be spontaneous. And you get it a lot more in basketball because you get a lot more scoring. And you get the best court stormings are when an underdog beats, a big favourite with like a last second 3-pointer. And then everyone just has to go because you were losing the 4, 3, 2, 1. And so, we've won, and there's no more come. And that why yours was brilliant was, I know you said there's a few, maybe a minute left, but it was the goal right there at the end that punctuated it. It wasn't just you'd come to the time and we've won and you got that bubble. You guys 30 seconds previously thought you'd lost. And then you score the goal that takes you to Wembley, and that's where the emotion comes. And when it's natural, it's brilliant. I think we were almost had it with Taylor with the different Taylor, but the Taylor report into Stadia, and then the sort of legacy of fans being told for ages that they were hooligans and things like that. There was sort of a period where people were sort of uneasy about doing it, but it's one of those things where, if the moment's right and you see a pitch invasion, it's just, I'm thinking sort of like Jimmy Glass and Carlisle and all, when you see those things and you think, yeah, that's absolutely right. It's gorgeous stuff.
I did get on the pitch in that game against Sheffield Wednesday that I mentioned. There was still a pitch invasion at the end because we'd actually got promoted the week before via other results. We got promoted at like 3 p.m. and we'd played at lunchtime because teams had lost. So we did have a moment in the stadium at that point to celebrate. So there was still a pitch invasion, but I just sort of ambled down the stand and onto the pitch. I was angry. I was annoyed that we'd lost the title. And I was annoyed at everyone. Why are you all pretending like this is a great moment? We've just tossed away the title in the last minute. And I was on the pitch, but I was annoyed.
It's because it wasn't right. But if you would, it's because the conditions weren't right. But I guess we've talked a lot about kind of great moments or despairing moments of yesteryear. What's your sort of current sort of match day setup? Who are you going with? How are you experiencing Watford at the moment? Talk us through your match day ritual and what are your highlights of that?
Yeah. So over the last few years, I've sort of had to kind of craft a new sort of routine, really. As I said, I used to go sort of semi-regularly with my dad, and at that time I was working a lot of weekends. So if there was ever a chance to go to a game, it would be not that often, and I would usually make the effort to take my dad, and we'd sit in random places. But since he passed away and I've sort of had a bit more time to go to matches and stuff, I've kind of slowly had to sort of build a new kind of match day routine, and it's kind of been quite a nice thing, really, in so much that I've now got a season ticket for the first time since the AD Boothroyd era in like the mid-noughties. And I sit with a group of people who I've come to know via being on the Watford podcast from the Rookery End. I've become great friends with all those guys. So we've got like a little bunch of us who we kind of don't all sit together, but we all sit kind of in front of each other or behind each other in the same little bit in the Rookery End. So that's kind of my sort of match day gang. And of course I've got like the usual sort of random bloke on the left or right of you who you sort of develop a relationship with as the season goes on, if you're a season ticket holder. So that's been fun to do this season. But in terms of like my match day sort of routine, I live in East London in Leytonstone, so I get the train up to Euston, get the train from Euston, and I usually get off at Bushey, which is a stop before Watford Junction. Because the pubs around Watford town centre and leading up to the ground aren't great. There's a couple of all right ones, but generally you're in a Wetherspoons or a big O'Neill's next to the station, and it's even worse if you're an away fan. There's not many good away pubs either around Watford, and the away concourse at Watford is so narrow they don't sell beer because I think it's a health and safety issue. But my match day routine, so I get off the train at Bushey. There's a pub right opposite Bushey Station called the Railway, which is a perfect little nice quiet pub. They always have the football on for the 12:30 game if it's a Saturday afternoon or whatever. Mainly Watford fans in there. There's a bunch of us who sort of, it's one of those places where you can kind of walk in even if you haven't arranged to meet anyone. There'd probably be someone there from our gang or whatever, and then you can have a few pints there, then amble your way to Vicarage Road, sort of through a nice park, Oxley Park. You sort of approach the ground from behind the stadium, so the opposite end of Vicarage Road, past the hospital, get yourself up there. And there's a little place called the Bunker, which is a sort of relatively new thing, which has been open for the last few years. It's a supporter-run little kind of bar, but supporters bar, but like in a little sort of lock-up warehouse, which I think the club used to like put the goals in and stuff, like after the games, but they've since found somewhere else to do that. And they've given this bunker to the supporters group, the 1881, which is like the guys that do a lot of the flags and the chanting during the games and stuff. And that place is kitted out with old kits and pictures and memorabilia. You can buy a few, you can have a few pints in there, and then literally you're right in the ground. And that's a really nice bit of organic supporting sort of culture, fan culture that's kind of developed over the last few years.
I have just looked up the railway because the way you were describing it, and I just wanted to get a picture in my head of what this fantastic pub was like. Do you know? I literally clicked on the railway, clicked on the photos on Google, and you're in them.
Really?
Did you know?
I didn't know
that. there's you and a couple of mates clearly on the way to the football, having a little walk out from there. I'll send you it. It's just it's just it's I'll try, it's you. There's a guy in like a blue and black and white sort of weird Watford away kit with Blau Punk as sponsors.
Mid-90s number that.
Yeah, and Dylan Nolt. Dylan? Does that name ring a bell?
He's a photographer. Yeah, so I bet he's posted them up on his site, and that's how you found them.
You look. I mean, that's really nice. So 100% verified. You do go to the railway beforehand, so that's nice. I like that. Is there anyone there that sort of, you wish you weren't sitting near, or is there any sort of interaction, or is there anything you go, oh, not him again?
Well, not really, but I mean, there are always fans that get on your nerves, and there's differences of opinions and stuff, and you certain fans will just form opinions about players, and they'll just go on. Ismail Assar has been a player that for the last few seasons, because of his big price tag, and there's lots of people that just take against him. He can do it even if he has a good game. There's still people moaning about him, which I get annoyed about, but that's fine. That's just par for the course at any ground across the country, I'm sure. But there is somebody that sits directly behind me, which I quite enjoy, really. But I know for some people, they get a bit annoyed by him. So there's an old guy who sits behind me, and he was the sort of head PE teacher from my secondary school when I was at secondary school, Mr. Askew. And he was very much a sort of old-fashioned kind of, sort of school mastery type of PE teacher. Always called everyone by their surnames and everything. Quite well spoken. Wasn't a posh school or anything, but I felt like he could have easily been somebody who was at Harrow School or something, as opposed to a Queen's Comprehensive in Bushey in Watford. And he's probably in his 80s now, because he's probably sort of in his 50s or sort of 60s or whatever when I was at school. But he's so engaged in the game, and I love it. And it's like he's watching his students every time. Well played, son. Good ball. That's a good ball. Well done. Come on, get back. Good header. Well done, son. Yes. And then every now and again he has to ask his mate or his son or whoever's next to him, well, who did that one? Who did that one? So maybe the eyes aren't quite as good as what they used to be. But I like it because it kind of it reminds me of being at school, and it's cool. I quite like it. But I do think there are a few people that go, "I wish he'd bloody shut up."
And has he recognised you, or have you kept a low profile?
No, I haven't engaged with him because I don't think he'd recognise me. But the only reason he would recognise me is not for a good reason, because I'll never forget this. As I said, I wasn't a footballer growing up, right? So I didn't turn up at secondary school having played loads of games for a Sunday team when I was younger or anything like that. But I did get into my primary school football team in year 6 because I was one of the oldest and I was a bit taller, so they stuck me at the back, and because I was showing an interest by then, they just shoved me in the team, and I was rubbish. We didn't play many games either. But then we turn up at secondary school, and the first football PE lesson of the year in secondary school, Mr. Askew assembles all of the boys across the year and says, right then, we need to split you all into groups based on ability. So we're going to do this in a few different ways. First of all, has anyone played for a Hertfordshire primary school team? So I'll say it a bit again. First of all, has anyone played for a Hertfordshire County primary school team? So me and my mate look at each other and go, well, I mean, our school was in Hertfordshire, right? We played for our primary school team. Yep. Both put our hands up. The only two in the whole year. Both put our hands up. It goes, brilliant. Okay, great. You two go into Group A. Look forward to seeing you play. So of course we've made out that we're county players by a process of miscommunication and misunderstanding, and we're terrible. So basically, I started the year in Group A, and by the end of the year, I was in Group C. And he kept coming. I remember, I never forget, he came over to me one day after one of the lessons. He said, listen, son, Walker, next week we're going to move you down to Group B. I think you'll enjoy your football down there a little bit more.
Lovely man management, isn't it? He's not punishing you. He's not making you train with the reserves. He's helping you enjoy your football. That brought such flashbacks to me because I did virtually the same thing. I was desperate to play in the school cricket team. Absolutely desperate. And I remember Mr. Collier, in my case, was like, got us all round after we'd been netting for a couple of weeks. And he's like, right, guys, first game's on Saturday. Does anyone know how to keep wicket? And no one said anything. And I was just like, hand up. He was like, great, James, you're the wicket keeper then. And I was the wicket keeper for the next 7 years.
There you go. We did better than I did.
I never got moved down to the C team, I remember absolutely bricking it. The very first time I was going to face a ball as a wicketkeeper was in an actual game, and I was there. And I still remember there's a lad called David Harry who was bowling. He was only medium pace, but I got down, copied Alex Stewart or Jack Russell, whoever, and I was like, I do not know how to do this. And fortunately, it was just regulation, outside off stump, and there it goes. But yeah, it's nice. Right. We've got to talk music. We nearly went off on this tangent earlier when you mentioned going to the Elton concert. He's so linked to your club. Him playing at Vicarage Road has to mean something to him, something more than, I know he's associated with Dodger Stadium and all these great venues. What was it like seeing Elton play Vicarage Road one last time?
It was amazing, yeah. So he inserted 2 dates of Vicarage Road into his seemingly never-ending farewell tour last summer. And he had to, really. He couldn't say farewell without playing Vicarage Road, a place that means so much to him and is associated so strongly with him. And for any fans, for any listeners who are unfamiliar with Watford, as you probably are, you'd be forgiven for thinking that maybe Elton was, wasn't that interested in the football, or was, a celebrity owner or whatever that wasn't that interested. No, when he was properly owning the club in the 70s and 80s, and when he came back in the 90s, every single manager or player, captain that you speak to said he would ring you up all the time. He would know everything about the players, about the opposition, wherever he was in, across the globe touring at the time. He'd be up at all hours on the phone, looking at teletext and all that. He was a fan. He grew up in Pinner. It's his club, right? And you could feel that passion last summer when he played those gigs. I mean, he played Vicarage Road 4 or 5 times throughout his career, and there were a couple in the noughties that he played, at least, but both of which the revenues from the concerts resulted in Watford being able to buy players. The second of the 2 was Troy Deeney. We bought the money that we paid to Walsall to buy Troy Deeney came from when Elton played a gig, which I think was a little bit sort of under the radar at the time. That wasn't made public. It has since come out. But the first of those 2 gigs in the noughties, this was in about 2003, 4, something around that sort of time. It was very explicitly, it was marketed as a concert in order to raise money and buy a player. And the player that we bought with that money was Paul Devlin from Birmingham.
Did you? I like Devlin. He was industrious.
He was indeed, yeah. But going back to seeing Elton play there, I've seen Elton play before. I saw him play at Bestival in 2014, I think it was, or 2013, and he was great. And, I've seen footage of him playing. He'll be brilliant at Glastonbury this weekend. But there was just an extra layer of emotion in the air, I think, with that concert. And everyone was wearing Watford shirts. Most people were wearing Watford shirts or had Watford scarves with them. He, halfway through the set on both nights, he sort of addressed the crowd and addressed the sort of disastrous state of things on the pitch and said, the players are going to have some fucking passion, to which the place, the roof went off the place. Everyone was cheering and everything. And it was it was an emotional night. Yeah, I went there with my mum, and like seeing him at the end of his concerts, he kind of this tour, the farewell tour, he sort of disappears up the yellow brick road at the end into the set, and it kind of was. It did feel there was some sort of finality to it. And obviously he's actually said that once his tour is over, he's going to try and get back involved with Watford in a more meaningful way. He still goes to matches and stuff, and he's got the stand named after him. Across the back of the stand at the Elton John stand, which is the East stand, perhaps they've gone a little bit too far, but they've got the lyrics of Your Song on the back of the stand all the way across the top. But you can't. You can't separate Elton from Vicarage Road. He's there are murals, there are pictures, there's the stand, there's the concerts, there's the players that he's bought. I mean, he's synonymous with the place, and it was special to see that gig last summer.
That's fantastic. I mean, I guess I don't remember him being that potty mouth when he was headlining Westminster Abbey, but so it's appropriate. It's appropriate for Vicarage Road. In many, I don't know if this is a stretch, but he's sort of like he set the blueprint for kind of what Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney are doing.
It's a good point, actually.
Famous entertainment owner, but really getting invested and really caring and having that passion. We can accept being up and down and in the leagues and whatnot, but we want to feel like the custodians of our club have got our club's best interests at heart. And you could never say that Elton John had anything but Watford's best interests at heart.
No, that's true. But I think, you say what you will about the current ownership, and they are in a difficult moment, that's for sure, sort of 11 years into their tenure, despite the fact that we've been in the Premier League for 5 years, had an FA Cup final and all that. One thing they have done really well, nobody can argue with, is they've actually transformed the stadium of Vicarage Road. When they turned up, it was three-sided. The East Stand had been condemned because it was mostly wooden, as I said to you when I first went there, but it hadn't done nobody had done any work on it since the 1920s, and it had literally been shut down by health and safety. And they had, for a period when there were Watford matches on TV, you would just see the cameras were on the opposite side, and that's what you would see. But then in the end, when it did get condemned, they kind of managed to put like a temporary structure up there so you could have the cameras so you could see the other side, so nobody would see it. But it wasn't until sort of 2014, 15, I don't think, that the work finally started taking place to sort of knock it down and rebuild a new stand in its place, which they now have done. And they've just made it, even like down to the sort of the concourses and the pictures they've got on the concourses and the murals and the sort of signage and the letter work across on the top of the stands, and just everything about it is red, yellow and black. It screams Watford. It feels tight now. They filled in the corners. It's gone from being a little bit of a tired, cobbled together stadium to feeling like a place that is, it just feels like Watford. It looks like Watford, and it's nice and it's tight and it's stylish, and it's just, they've done a really good job at that, actually. And if you haven't been to Vicarage Road for sort of 10 years or more, if you did come back now, I think you would be surprised. It is not a cauldron, not a fortress, as we discussed at the beginning, but it does have a sort of spirit to it and a nice vibe to it, I think. Again, the fans are never going to be like, I know, supporters of Leeds or of, Manchester United or Liverpool or sort of these big clubs that are going to really will their team over the line, because it has that, we are that family club, that ethos, but that brings with it sometimes a little bit of a soft underbelly. But it's a place that, I'm looking at a picture of it now as I talk to you, it's home. It's home for Watford, and it's much better to live in a house that is in good nick than one that needs a lick of paint and the roof is leaking.
Wish you the best for the upcoming season, and I hope to be able to get down to a game at Vicarage Road with you sometime soon. Well,
as I say, the away end experience is probably the worst part of the ground because the concourse is so narrow. There's been a number of teams last season who were chanting with their displeasure at not being able to buy a beer or any alcohol in the concourse. I can only imagine that the reason that the reason that we don't sell alcohol on that concourse is because there's literally not enough space for everyone to queue up. So perhaps that's the one thing we do need to sort out about the ground. But that stand is right on the road. I don't think there's much they can do about it. So get tanked up before you come in, lads, if you're going to visit as an away fan.
Tanked up for what's almost certainly going to be a Tuesday 7:45 kickoff, and with a 2-hour drive afterwards home. Yeah, that's a great plan, mate. All right. Thank you very much, Dave.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That's it for the Grand Jewels this week. It was great to hear about Vicarage Road. Please go back into the archive and look at some of those other great episodes. Please get in touch with us on social media and tell us who you think should be on a future episode. And if you do like the Grand Jewels, no one ever says no to a 5-star review. All the best.